They called me the quiet one, the invisible soldier, the girl who cleaned boots and filed reports while the real heroes planned missions that would change the world. For 3 years, I sat in the back of every briefing room, watching men half my intelligence get promoted to positions I could do in my sleep. I watched them stumble through strategies I had perfected in my mind before they even finished speaking. My own family thought I was just another face in the crowd. My father, a decorated Vietnam veteran, would pat my head at family gatherings and say, "Maybe one day you'll do something important, sweetheart." But today, everything changed. Today, the most powerful military commander in the United States looked directly at me and said 5 words that silenced an entire room. "She's leading the mission." If those words just gave you chills, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because your moment of recognition is closer than you think. And suddenly, everyone wanted to know my name. I am Captain Sarah Mitchell, and for most of my military career, I might as well have been invisible. At 28, I had spent 6 years in the United States Army, watching mediocrity get rewarded while excellence went unnoticed. I was the soldier who arrived first and left last, the one who knew every protocol by heart, who could take apart and rebuild a military rifle blindfolded, who spoke 4 languages fluently, and could read satellite images like others read newspapers. But none of that seemed to matter. Every morning, I would stand in formation with Alpha Company, my uniform pressed to perfection, my boots so polished they reflected the dawn sky. And every morning, I would feel the weight of being overlooked, settling on my shoulders like an old, familiar coat. The other soldiers had nicknames. Rodriguez was Tank because of his size. Williams was Eagle Eye for his marksmanship. Davidson was Professor because he went to college before enlisting. Me, I was just Mitchell. Sometimes, "Hey you." Often I wasn't called anything at all. Our base, Fort Campbell in Kentucky, buzzed with the constant energy of soldiers preparing for deployments, training exercises, and the endless machinery of military life. But I moved through it all like a ghost, present, competent, but never truly seen. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was a communications specialist with a top-secret clearance, fluent in Arabic, Farsi, Russian, and Mandarin. I had graduated at the top of my class from both basic training and advanced individual training. My psychological evaluations consistently rated me as exceptional under pressure, with an IQ that put me in the 99th percentile. Yet somehow, I remained the best-kept secret in the entire United States Army. My invisibility wasn't confined to the military. It had started long before I ever put on a uniform. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, I was the daughter who always had her nose in a book, while my older brother Jake played football and charmed everyone with his easy smile. Jake was the golden child, quarterback, valedictorian, full scholarship to Ohio State. When he joined the Marines after college, our father's chest swelled with pride. "Now that's my boy," Dad would say, his weathered hands holding Jake's enlistment photo like it was made of gold. A real warrior, just like his old man. When I announced my intention to join the Army, the reaction was different. Mom sighed and said, "Oh, honey, are you sure? The military is so rough for girls." Dad patted my shoulder and said, "Well, I suppose someone has to do the paperwork." The paperwork. As if my entire military career was destined to be nothing more than filing and data entry. During my last family gathering before my current deployment, the conversation had been particularly painful. We were sitting around the dinner table, the same oak table where I had done homework as a child, where I had announced my acceptance to multiple universities, where I had tried countless times to share my military achievements with a family that seemed determined not to hear them. Jake had just finished telling a story about his latest promotion to major, complete with dramatic gestures and war stories that had everyone hanging on his every word. The room was electric with admiration and pride. Then Uncle Frank, Dad's brother who never missed a chance to voice his opinions, looked at me and said, "And what about you, Sarah? Still shuffling papers around?" The table erupted in polite laughter. Mom reached over and squeezed my hand in what I suppose was meant to be comfort. "Sarah does important work," she said in that tone mothers use when they're trying to make their children feel better about obvious disappointments. "Every organization needs people to handle the administrative side." I wanted to tell them about the classified operations I'd supported, about the terrorist communications I'd intercepted and translated, about the night I'd spent 8 hours straight decoding intelligence that prevented an attack on American forces overseas. about the commendation letters hidden in my personal files. Letters I could never show them because the missions they referenced were classified above their clearance level. Instead, I smiled politely and said, something like that. Because that's what invisible people do. We smile. We nod. We let others believe whatever makes them comfortable. If anyone listening to this has ever been dismissed by their own family, you know exactly how that feels. You're not alone in this. October 15th started like any other day. I was in the communications center at 5 a.m, reviewing overnight intelligence reports while most of the base was still asleep. The coffee was terrible, as always, but it was hot, and it kept me focused as I scanned through intercepted transmissions from various hotspots around the globe. That's when I saw it. Buried in a routine sweep of communications from a known terrorist cell in Syria, there was a pattern that made my blood run cold. 3 separate transmissions, each using different code words, but all referring to the same coordinated event, an event scheduled for exactly 72 hours from now. My hands moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, cross-referencing the intelligence with previous intercepts, geographical data, and known terrorist methodologies. Within 30 minutes, I had assembled a complete picture of what was being planned. It was an ambush, a sophisticated multi-layered trap designed to target a high-value convoy that would be traveling through the Tanf region near the Syrian-Jordanian border, the convoy that was carrying Senator Patricia Reynolds and a delegation of congressional leaders on a fact-finding mission. The same Senator Reynolds who chaired the Armed Services Committee, the same delegation that included the ranking members of both the Intelligence and Foreign Relations Committees. If this attack succeeded, it wouldn't just be a terrorist victory. It would be a catastrophic blow to American foreign policy leadership. If you've ever discovered something crucial that everyone else missed, you understand what I felt in that moment. Sometimes the quiet ones see what others can't. I immediately drafted a priority intelligence report and sent it through proper channels. Then I did something I had never done before. I walked directly to the office of Colonel Harrison, the base commander, and requested an immediate meeting. Colonel Harrison was a man who commanded respect simply by walking into a room. Tall, silver-haired, with eyes that seemed to see everything and judge most of it lacking. He had led men in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he had the kind of presence that made even experienced officers stand a little straighter. When I knocked on his door at 6:30 in the morning, he looked up from his morning briefings with the expression of a man who was not accustomed to being interrupted by junior officers. "Captain Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying that particular mix of authority and impatience that senior officers perfect over decades. "This better be important. Sir, I've intercepted communications indicating an imminent threat to congressional delegation traveling through Syria. I believe they're walking into a carefully planned ambush." For the next 15 minutes, I presented my analysis with the precision and clarity that had served me well throughout my career. I showed him the intercepted transmissions, explained the pattern recognition that had revealed the plot, and outlined the tactical implications of the intelligence. Colonel Harrison listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each detail I presented. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, studying the materials I had laid out on his desk. "Captain," he said finally, "how long did it take you to piece this together?" "Approximately 37 minutes from initial intercept to complete analysis, sir." 37 minutes. He repeated the words slowly, as if testing their weight. "And you're confident in this assessment?" "Yes, sir. I'd stake my career on it." Another long pause. Then Colonel Harrison reached for his secure phone. "Get me General Morrison at the Pentagon. Priority 1. What happened next was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my military career. Within 2 hours, I found myself in a secure conference room with some of the most powerful people in the American military establishment. General Morrison had flown in from Washington. Colonel Harrison was there, along with the base's intelligence chief and operations officer. Also present were 2 men in civilian clothes, who introduced themselves only as consultants, but whose bearing and the deference shown to them by everyone else suggested they were from agencies that didn't officially exist. The room hummed with tension, and the kind of focused energy that emerges when national security hangs in the balance. General Morrison, a compact man with steel-gray eyes and 3 stars on his collar, looked directly at me as I presented my intelligence analysis again, this time with even greater detail and supporting evidence. "Captain Mitchell," he said when I finished, "your analysis suggests that this terrorist cell has inside knowledge of the delegation's route and timing. That's a serious accusation. Yes, sir. The specificity of their communications, combined with the tactical sophistication of the planned ambush, strongly suggests they have access to classified information about the delegation's movements. One of the civilian consultants leaned forward. What's your recommendation, Captain? This was the moment I had been preparing for my entire career, though I never could have imagined it would happen like this. Sir, I recommend immediate implementation of Operation Silent Shield, a counter-ambush strategy that uses the terrorists' own intelligence against them. We allow them to believe their plan is proceeding as expected, while simultaneously positioning our forces to neutralize the threat and capture high-value targets for interrogation. The room fell silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. General Morrison exchanged glances with the civilian consultants, then looked back at me. Captain, you realize what you're proposing? This would be a joint operation involving multiple branches of the military, intelligence agencies, and international coordination with Jordanian forces. The level of complexity. I understand, sir, but the intelligence window is closing rapidly. We have approximately 68 hours before the delegation enters the kill zone. Colonel Harrison spoke up. General, Captain Mitchell has an exemplary record in intelligence analysis. Her clearance level and language skills make her uniquely qualified to— I'm not questioning her qualifications, Colonel, General Morrison interrupted. I'm questioning whether we have the resources and coordination capability to pull off something this complex in such a short time frame. That's when I said the words that would change my life forever. Sir, if I may, I've already prepared a complete operational framework. With your permission, I can have detailed tactical plans ready for review within 4 hours. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of consideration. It was the silence of shock. Finally, General Morrison smiled. It was a small smile, but in a room full of career military officers, it might as well have been a standing ovation. Captain Mitchell, he said, I think it's time we had a longer conversation. For the next 18 hours, I lived in a world I had only imagined. The inner sanctum of military strategic planning where decisions are made that reshape the global landscape. Working with a team of the military's best tactical minds, I transformed my initial intelligence assessment into a comprehensive operational plan that was both audacious and elegant in its simplicity. Operation Silent Shield would work like this. The congressional delegation would proceed with their planned route, but with several critical modifications. Advanced reconnaissance teams would be positioned along the entire route 12 hours before the convoy's arrival. Counter-surveillance operatives would identify and neutralize terrorist spotters. And most importantly, a rapid response force would be pre-positioned to execute a precision strike on the terrorist ambush site. But the genius of the plan lay in its misdirection. Rather than simply preventing the ambush, we would allow it to begin, long enough to identify all participants and communication networks, before overwhelming the terrorists with superior firepower and tactical positioning. It was a strategy that required split-second timing, flawless communication, and the kind of coordination that most military officers spend their entire careers hoping to achieve once. As I presented the plan to increasingly senior levels of command, I watched something extraordinary happen. The same people who had overlooked me for years were suddenly seeing me clearly for the first time. General Morrison called it brilliant strategic thinking. The civilian consultants used words like innovative and game-changing. Colonel Harrison simply looked at me with something approaching awe and said, Captain, where the hell have you been hiding? But the real validation came when General Morrison made a phone call to someone whose title I was not authorized to know, and I heard him say, We have an officer here who may have just prevented an international incident. I'm recommending immediate operational command authority. Operational command authority. The word sent electricity through my entire body. For 6 years, I had been the invisible soldier, the one who executed orders, filed reports, and watched from the sidelines while others made the decisions that mattered. Now, suddenly, I was being given command of one of the most sensitive military operations in recent memory. The next 48 hours were a blur of briefings, equipment checks, communication protocols, and the 1,000 details that separate successful military operations from disasters. I found myself commanding a joint task force that included Army Rangers, Air Force reconnaissance specialists, Navy intelligence operatives, and assets from agencies that officially didn't exist. These were warriors who had served in Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, and conflicts that would never appear in any public record. and they were taking orders from me. The transformation was surreal. Soldiers who had never bothered to learn my name were now addressing me as ma'am and hanging on my every word. Officers who had treated me like furniture were now seeking my approval for tactical decisions. But more than that, I could see in their eyes something I had never seen before: respect. Not the polite deference that junior officers receive from enlisted personnel, but genuine professional respect for someone they recognized as exceptionally competent. The operation itself unfolded exactly as planned. Our reconnaissance teams identified 17 terrorist operatives positioned along the convoy route. Counter-surveillance eliminated their early warning capabilities, and when the ambush began, our rapid response force was already in position to turn what the terrorists thought would be their moment of triumph into their complete destruction. Within 90 minutes, we had neutralized the entire terrorist cell, captured 4 high-value targets alive for intelligence purposes, and ensured that the congressional delegation reached their destination without ever knowing how close they had come to disaster. 0 American casualties. 0 diplomatic incidents. Complete mission success. When the dust settled and the final reports were filed, General Morrison called me into his office for a private conversation. "Captain Mitchell," he said, "I've been in the military for 32 years. I've commanded operations in 4 different theaters of war, and I can count on one hand the number of officers I've met who have your combination of analytical intelligence and operational instinct." He paused, looking at me with the kind of intensity that made it clear he was making a decision that would affect both of our careers. "I'm recommending you for immediate promotion to Major, assignment to Strategic Intelligence Command, and fast-track consideration for advanced leadership training. The Pentagon needs officers like you in positions where you can make a real difference." I felt tears threatening to form in my eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming emotion of finally being seen for who I really was. "Thank you, sir," I managed to say. "Don't thank me, Captain. You earned this. The only question is why it took so long for someone to notice." 3 weeks later, I was back in Ohio for my promotion ceremony. The same family that had dismissed my military career as paperwork was now sitting in the front row of the base chapel, watching as General Morrison pinned Major's oak leaves on my collar and presented me with the Defense Meritorious Service Medal. The citation, read aloud to the assembled crowd, detailed my exceptional analytical skills and tactical leadership in preventing a terrorist attack that could have resulted in catastrophic loss of American lives and significant damage to national security interests. Of course, the specifics were classified, so my family still didn't know exactly what I had done, but they knew it was important enough to bring a 3-star general from Washington to personally conduct the ceremony. Dad's chest was puffed out so far I thought his buttons might pop. Mom was crying happy tears. Uncle Frank was uncharacteristically quiet. But it was Jake's reaction that meant the most to me. After the ceremony, as we stood together in the chapel vestibule, he looked at me with something I had never seen in his eyes before: genuine admiration. "Sarah," he said, "I need to apologize. I've spent so many years thinking I was the military success story in this family, and all this time, you were—" He gestured helplessly, struggling to find words. "I was doing my job," I said simply. "No," he said firmly. "You were being extraordinary, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." Later that evening, at the family dinner that had been arranged to celebrate my promotion, the conversation was completely different from any we had ever had. Instead of Jake dominating the discussion with his stories, everyone wanted to hear about my experiences. Instead of being asked about paperwork, I was being asked about leadership and strategy, and what it felt like to be responsible for operations that mattered on a national level. Uncle Frank, who had spent years treating my military service as a consolation prize, now looked at me with something approaching reverence. "So," he said carefully, "when people ask me what my niece does in the army, what should I tell them?" I smiled, thinking about the years of being overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. "Tell them," I said, "that I'm the one they call when the impossible needs to become possible." The changes in how people saw me weren't limited to my family. Back at Fort Campbell, I was no longer the invisible soldier in the back of the briefing room. I was the officer that other officers came to when they needed problems solved. I was the one that senior commanders consulted when they needed strategic analysis. I was the one whose recommendations carried weight in rooms where decisions were made that affected thousands of lives. My new assignment to Strategic Intelligence Command meant working directly with the Pentagon on operations that spanned multiple continents and involved coordination with intelligence agencies around the world. It was exactly the kind of work I had always known I was capable of, but had never been given the opportunity to do. More importantly, I was now in a position to identify and develop other soldiers who, like me, had been overlooked despite their exceptional abilities. I made it my personal mission to ensure that competence and potential were recognized, regardless of whether they came packaged in the form that traditional military leadership expected. The quiet analysts. The introverted specialists. The soldiers who were brilliant but not self-promoting. I found them, mentored them, and made sure their abilities were utilized properly, because I knew what it felt like to have so much to offer, and nowhere to offer it. 6 months after Operation Silent Shield, I was invited to speak at the Army War College about intelligence analysis and strategic planning. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of some of the most senior officers in the United States military, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. How many of you, I asked the assembled officers, have soldiers in your commands who you've never really noticed? How many exceptional people are sitting in your briefing rooms, filing your reports, and executing your orders, while their true potential remains completely invisible to you? The room was silent, but I could see recognition in many of their faces. I spent 6 years being one of those people, I continued. 6 years watching mediocrity get promoted while excellence went unrecognized. Not because I wasn't performing, but because I wasn't performing in a way that fit traditional expectations of what exceptional looks like. I told them about the morning I walked into Colonel Harrison's office with intelligence that would prevent a catastrophic terrorist attack. I told them about the moment when years of being overlooked suddenly transformed into being entrusted with one of the most sensitive operations in recent military history. The difference between being invisible and being indispensable, I said, often comes down to a single moment when someone in authority is willing to look beyond their preconceptions and see what's actually there. After my presentation, a young lieutenant approached me. She was small, quiet, with intelligent eyes, and the kind of nervous energy that suggested she had something important to say, but wasn't sure how to say it. "Ma'am," she said, "I've been working in intelligence analysis for 2 years. I've identified patterns and potential threats that I think are significant, but, well, nobody seems to listen to suggestions from junior officers." I looked at her and saw myself 3 years ago. "What's your name, Lieutenant?" "Jennifer Park, ma'am." "Lieutenant Park, I want you to prepare a comprehensive briefing on your analysis and present it to me next week. If your intelligence is as significant as you believe it is, I'll make sure it reaches the right people." Her eyes lit up with the kind of hope that I remembered feeling. That morning I decided to walk into Colonel Harrison's office. "Thank you, ma'am. You don't know what this means to me." But I did know. I knew exactly what it meant. Today, as I tell you this story, I am Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Deputy Director of Strategic Intelligence Operations for United States Central Command. The girl who was invisible for 6 years now has her name on intelligence reports that cross the desks of generals, cabinet secretaries, and occasionally, the president himself. The soldiers under my command don't call me "Hey you" or "the quiet one." They call me Colonel or Ma'am. And when they have problems that need solving, they seek me out specifically because they know I'll listen and they know I'll act. My family now understands that when I said I was doing important work, I was dramatically understating the case. Dad keeps newspaper clippings about military operations that I can't tell him I was involved in, but he somehow knows anyway. Jake and I have developed the kind of relationship I always hoped we could have. One built on mutual respect between professionals who understand the weight of responsibility that comes with military leadership. But perhaps most importantly, I've learned that being invisible isn't always a disadvantage. The years I spent being overlooked taught me to observe, to analyze, to understand systems and people and situations in ways that more naturally prominent officers never develop. The patience I learned from waiting for recognition taught me the value of timing and the importance of being prepared when opportunity finally arrives. I wouldn't change any of it, because now, when someone asks who I am, the answer is simple. I'm the one who was invisible until the moment I became indispensable. I'm the one who spent years being overlooked, until the day a 3-star general looked directly at me and said, "She's leading the mission." And now, everyone knows my name. They used to call me the quiet one. Now they call me when the world is in danger, and they need someone who can save it. The invisible soldier who became the irreplaceable leader. That's who I am. That's who I've always been. The only difference is that now, finally, everyone else can see it too. If this story resonated with you, if you're still waiting for your moment of recognition, I want you to know that your time is coming. Subscribe and hit that notification bell, because every week we share stories of people who went from invisible to indispensable. Your story could be next. And remember, the world needs what you have to offer, even if they don't see it yet.